Once again, it's a very good morning to everyone. I would like to particularly welcome those that are visiting us this morning. As Keith has already said, if there is any question that you might have, please feel free to ask so that we can explain why things are being done the way we have just been doing this morning. But nevertheless, you are very much welcome, and we do enjoy your presence this morning, hoping and trusting that you may like what you see and you may be able to come back again in the future. You are really welcome. The book of Hebrews, in the 11th chapter, it gives us a lot of men and women that are mentioned there who are considered to be men of faith and women of faith. If we were to be asked to vote this day, and we were asked to vote for who do you think is one of those people that you would have wanted to be in the list who is not there, I would quickly go and vote for the man that is called Job. And of course, we are going to be looking at Job this morning, and a couple of things that we find from Job that we can learn from. And of course, what we are going to do and how we are going to do it is to try to run through the first chapter of the book of Job, and of course, part of the second chapter. Then finally, we are going to come back to the first chapter, and we are going to go back to the reading, and of course, we are going to make a conclusion from there. But the story of Job is a story of this man who was larger than life character himself, if we were to use modern language. This is a man who was so faithful. No wonder why I would actually vote for him today, to actually be there also in the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, because he was such a faithful man. Of course, those elections are never going to come and I will never be asked to vote. So the Bible has already been written and it's what it is, and we have to condemn and accept what is there. But this man would actually fit in there as well, because of his faith. So, the reading began from chapter 1 of the book of Job, verse 1. Reading from the English Standard Version, it says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God, and he turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters." I think it's important for us to say that Job was a parent. Because if we just end by saying they were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters, we may really not understand what Job was going through. But I think if we use the word that we all understand of being a parent, what it means to nurse children, we may actually understand the task that was before Job. Not only being a parent, but he was a parent of 7 sons and 3 daughters. So he really had children, 10 of them. So he was a parent, and of course, as I'm saying, that gives us an idea of the responsibilities he had to his children and the headache. Of course, he would have to go through. All parents would understand what I'm talking about. There are several headaches that you actually have to go through if you are a parent. Job also went through those headaches, some being brought about by the naughtiness behavior of the children. But verse 3 says, he possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camel, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. Again, this brings in another dimension of responsibility to this man that was called Job. If you are going to own 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, it's again another attention that we have to be paying to those things that have just been mentioned there. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Verse 4 says, his sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day. And they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So the man was very rich. Few rich people have time for God. I think we know that in our Middle. We have several people that are rich who doesn't really care about God. Who doesn't? Because people have made a mistake to think that if I have riches, then I have everything that I need. So many of us would forget God if we were to get riches. This was unlike this man called Job. Men used their riches to go to even go further away from God. But Job, rich as he was, he still wanted to come closer to where God was. Job's children, we would understand, they obviously had unlimited access to their father's wealth. I mean, we all do the same. If we have things that we possess in our lives, we actually have an unbridled, habit of letting our children have and enjoy those things. That's the right of a child. If you are born to a father who has some things, you also, by extension, own the same thing. So you enjoy the right of those things. So his children would actually enjoy this. And as I'm saying, this is very common with all of us here. But there is something that is being said there that would actually happen. When we go to verse 5, and when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did. I want you to listen to the last word there. He did not do this once, neither did he do it twice or thrice, but he did it continually. Every time his children went out and they did whatever they did, in case they have sinned against God, Job would actually do this religiously. It is rare, as I've already mentioned, to have a rich person who has an interest in the Lord. In the book of Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus, when he was teaching what we now know as the sermon of Jesus on the Mount, one of the things that he actually said in verse 24 of the 6th chapter, he said, "No one can serve two masters, for either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other." And in short, Jesus was saying you cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God and riches. Job had money, Job had riches, but also Job had God with him. How is it possible that Job was still able to serve God even though he was so rich? This was a genuine man. And listen to the genuine spiritual concern that he had for his children. From a very careful parent. All of us are actually supposed to be like that. In fact, this is perhaps the difference that we may actually have with Job. Many of us maybe are not exactly in the same mold as Job, having that genuine concern for our children's spiritual well-being. Job had. In fact, many of us seriously lack this aspect. We concentrate more and we become many experts, of course, on the physical aspects. I mean, we can send our children to school, expensive schools. We can buy our children clothes, expensive clothes. We can make sure that our children are comfortable with whatever this world can offer. We do that. But we forget that the spiritual well-being of that child that you are pampering with all the gifts and the child that you are spoiling is actually much more important than you are giving. Job was unlike many of us, many parents today. Many of us parents today inadvertently have used their possessions to help children distance themselves from God. You may not understand what I'm talking about, but I know you will understand it. We have, by default, spaced our children away from God. I'll give you an example. Think of a parent that sends a child to a very faraway country in the name of education or in the name of a job, but paying a blind eye to the spiritual side of the child's life. You are using your resources to actually distance your child away from God. When they were living with you, they served God. But now that you are sending them away, very far away from you, and you are not even paying attention to the spiritual side of them, what you are actually concentrating on is the physical aspect of their life. You cannot fit the description of Job. If I also do that, I can't fit the description of Job. Because Job was unlike that. Job made sure that when his children are out where he wasn't himself, when they came back, he made sure that he did something in case they have sinned against God. So let me do this for them. Job was very cautious in his life. Even if he didn't know whether his children had sinned or not, he did it nevertheless, just in case they had sinned. And he did this, as I've already said, continually. So this was a good man. we are looking at this man who is a good man there. And we have been told about this description of this man, and we can only conclude and say this man was a very good man. But there's something that's going to happen, a new dimension that's going to happen to Job's life. Verse 6 says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and from the earth, and from walking up and about on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is nothing, that there is none like him on the earth. He is a blameless, he is upright man, who fears God, and who turns away from evil. And in fact, if we were doubting the credibility of Job, I think this verse 8 should rest that doubt. Because even God himself, who does not praise mediocre, God himself, who cannot give marks when marks are not deserved, God himself is going to testify to Job. And he's going to say Job was a good man, Job was blameless, Job was upright, he is someone who turned away from evil. If God showers someone with praises, that becomes the climax. You can't expect any other praises from anyone else except from God. If God is going to say, you are a good man, for sure you are a good man. Nobody can say you are not, because God would have seen that. We don't need any other further commendation for Job than this, to know that even his relationship with God was so tight. He had a very good relationship with God, and God recognizes that. God does not recognize mediocre. God is the best arbitrator who obviously judges fairly. So now the devil has heard about this. He is actually going to come and suggest things to God. Let's jump to verse 18. Some of the verses that we are jumping, you can read them on your own. So verse 18 is going to tell us something. While he was yet speaking, so we are going to see between the verses that we have jumped from verse 18, we are going to see one bad thing happening to Job in quick succession, one bad thing after another. Job is essentially going to lose almost everything. But as if that was not enough, verse 18 says, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you the story. If Job had lost everything else, 7,000 camels, 3,000 sheep, 3,000 this and that, perhaps we would say, well, Job still has his children with him, at least they are going to console him. Now Job has lost everything. All the physical wealth he has lost. Even his children he also has lost. Only one servant is remaining, so that he could come and tell Job about this story. But listen to what happened to Job in verse 20. Then Job arose, and he tore his robe, and he shaved his head. He fell on the ground, and he worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. This is strange. How can Job say this? You would expect Job to be wailing and even killing himself. We have seen it happening even in our day. A mother who has 6, 7 children, losing only one child, they actually go wild. Job has lost all 10, 3 daughters and 7 sons. But still Job is coming back, and he is saying they did not belong to me. Because naked I came on this world, and naked I'm going to return without anything. So God gave, and God has taken. Who am I to contend with God? I can't complain. And in all this, Job did not charge God with wrongdoing. Turn with me to chapter 2 and look at a couple of things before we can come to the back. So, everything that is around Job has been taken away. All his wealth, all his children, everything else. There's only him and his wife who are left now. So Satan is going to go back to God again. And God is going to ask him a question and say, you are coming back again to walk about the earth. Have you considered my servant Job? And Satan is going to say, yes, I considered him. But the reason why he is still afraid and the reason why he still respects you is because you have not done anything to him directly. Flesh for flesh. If you attack his flesh, he is going to say, get away. And God said to Satan, go and do exactly the same. And Satan came back. And this time, he is aiming at Job and he attacked Job. Verse 3 says, and the Lord said to Satan, if you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and who turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give for his life. And of course, Satan is going to be allowed to come back. And he's going to do everything that he could do on Job. But this still is going to be Job's response. Verse 10. But he said to him, this is after his wife had suggested, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. This is strange. What makes it strange is this. Chapter 1, verse 13 to 18, tell us that Job lost his wealth. Chapter 1, verse 19, tells us that Job lost his children. The second chapter, verse 7 to verse 8, they tell us that he lost his health. Chapter 2, verse 9, almost tells us that he lost his wife. Not to death, but the life is gone by with Satan, because the life is going to suggest and say, curse God and die. Such a kind of a person who is suggesting that to you is not thinking right, and is not thinking the same with you. So technically, he has lost his wife. If you read chapter 4 to verse 30, to chapter 32, you are going to see Job having to contend with his friends. 3 friends. Let me say 4, because there was another young man who actually accompanied the friends, who is going to speak right at the end. All this time, his friends are going to take turns to accuse Job of wrongdoing. You will read that story between the 4th chapter and the 32nd chapter. So he lost his friends. So he lost his relatives as well. Because chapter 42, if you were to read verse 10 to verse 11, only after Job has been restored, his relatives are going to come back and they are going to start consoling him. Right at the end. When Job needed them, they were nowhere to be seen. So, Job lost all the pillars that support a person to function. If you lose your children, if you lose your wealth, your resources, if you lose your friends, if you lose your wife, if you lose your relatives, you have lost basically everything that is around you. He lost all the pillars that support a person to function. But interestingly and strangely, he did not sin, he did not lose shape, he did not shift his faith. He remained focused on God. His allegiance remained on God. He did not drop even a small particle of his faith that he had for God. Why? Was Job a Superman? Was Job superhuman? Was he some superpower? Was he supernatural? Of course no. He was not. He was neither of the 4 that I've mentioned above. He was not a Superman. He was not superhuman. He was not some superpower or some supernatural being. He was a natural human being as you are. He was just like you, this Job. So how then did he maintain and keep his shape intact, even under such tremendous pressure that he was being bombarded from left, right, and center by the devil? How did he remain resolute? How did he remain focused? And I think we need to go back to chapter 1, verse 1, to get the answer. Turn with me back to chapter 1, verse 1. And let's discuss some things there before I sit down. Verse 1 says of chapter 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless, he was upright, he feared God, and he turned away from evil. There are 4 very strong attributes that we get from Job, or that we are getting from verse 1, which I believe he helped him to remain standing even though he should have fallen. He did not fall. Why? Because I believe, because of these 4 attributes. What are the attributes that we are talking about? The first one is he was blameless. The King James Version, to those of you who are reading from the King James Version, it actually says he was perfect. This quickly reminds me of the Apostle Paul. Somewhere in the book of Galatians, in chapter 2, verse 20 in particular, Paul actually says about himself, I was crucified with Christ, and I died. But if you wait a minute and you think about Paul, when the Lord was crucified, that is Jesus, Paul was nowhere to be seen. In fact, when the church started in Jerusalem, Paul was one of those that were pushing for the demise of the church. When Stephen is going to be stoned to death, Paul is one of those that were giving his vote. And they were saying, let this man die. Why was he dying? Because he was preaching Christ. A few years down the line, Paul is going to repent on his way to Damascus. And Paul is going to write 13 of the New Testament books. One of them is Galatians. And in chapter 2, Paul is now saying, I was crucified and I died. It's no longer I who lives, but Christ is living in me. What is Paul talking about? What is it that he has seen? And you can actually imagine and see that right through Paul's life, there are certain things we alluded to Paul this morning when we were studying, and we were talking about those men that can stand and walk tall and even are confident to go to God and say to God, please remember me for the good that I did. Paul is just one of those men. Why? Because when Paul repented, he repented for sure. And this is the Paul who is going to write that he was crucified. What is it that he is talking about? The crucifixion that he is talking about is that he is now walking with Christ. When people want to come to him to kill him, Paul is ready to die for the Lord. Because he now believes that life is in Christ and it's nowhere else. So Paul was upright. Paul had become so upright. He had become so perfect, at least according to the King James Version, just like what Job was. He was crucified. It's no longer him that lived, but it's Christ that was living in him. First attribute that Job had, he was upright. He was perfect, according to the King James Version. But listen to another attribute that he also had. The second attribute is that he was upright. And in fact, it's interesting. We talked about Joshua briefly this morning. And we can't help it but think about Joshua. When Moses has died, that's Joshua chapter 1. God is going to visit Joshua, and God is going to handpick Joshua, and he wants Joshua to be the commander of his army. So Joshua is going to be leading all these people, stiff-necked people, that had caused the death of Moses because of their disobedience. Moses has to take over. But there's something that is interesting that God said to Joshua. He actually said, he told him not to turn right or to turn left, but to be strong and to be courageous. Joshua 1 verse 7 says that. You should not turn left, neither should you turn right, but you should be strong and you should be courageous. Because the people that you are leading are going to mislead you, but don't be misled. You need to go straight, because those are the kind of people that I'm looking for. So he had chosen Joshua to be such a person that was going to be upright. Job was upright. Job was not moving to the left. He was not moving to the right. He was not moving backwards, but he was going forward. When he believed that God had life, and he really believed that for sure, and he moved with God. Third attribute that Job had, he feared God. And I think this actually culminates in whatever Job was doing, the fear of the Lord. The book of Proverbs in chapter 16 verse 6 says, by steadfast love and faithfulness, iniquity is atoned for, and by the fear of the Lord, one turns away from evil. The writer of the book of Proverbs, who of course is believed to be Solomon, the wisest man ever to live, or at least ever to be recorded in the Bible, he is going to acknowledge that the fear of God is actually going to give us wisdom. The fear of God is going to cause us to move away from evil. Again this morning, I made reference to Matthew chapter 4. Luke chapter 4 as well tells us the same story. This is the story of Jesus that is being tempted by the devil. But when Jesus was tempted, his reply, even though Jesus was God, even though Jesus could have, breathed into the devil and the devil would have disappeared, but Jesus went back to the bowl and he fed Satan to the bowl because it is written, I can't do this because I honor God, I honor the Father who sent me. Imagine you and me, if every other time that sin is being dangled in front of us, we remember to say it is written that such kind of behavior is not for me. We would be upright and we would be walking straight, just like Job was doing. In fact, that would be the knowledge of God, which is going to cause us to walk away from evil. The book of Proverbs, I'm telling you, it says the fear of the Lord. If one has it, he is going to walk away from evil. Nobody is going to commit a sin if they fear God, because they remember. Remember the young man called Joseph. At about 17 years, Joseph is going to move into the cauldron of Egypt. While he is there, Joseph is going to be tempted by Potiphar's wife. But Joseph stood still. Why? Because he was upright. In fact, I like the answer that he's going to give to Potiphar's wife. How can I do this? How can I commit a sin against God? He remembered that sleeping with Potiphar's wife may never be known by anybody, because it's only the two of us, but God will always know it. So let me move away from the sin. If you are upright, you walk away from sin. Fourth attribute that Job had, he turned away from evil. And that's exactly what the Apostle Paul cries for. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 22, the Apostle Paul says, abstain from every appearance of evil. What is he talking about? He is saying we should not be seen where evil is being committed. If we can have these attributes ourselves, you and me, we will not hesitate to give God the best. By the best, I mean the best service. There are certain things and several things that you and me are required to do to God in service to Him. If we have these attributes that Job had, we will be prepared to die for God. If we have these four attributes that Job had, we are going to give God the best. At times we lack. We don't give God the best. I've always cried, especially with time. And I've always said this to you, of which this will be a reminder, that time was given to you and to me to manage. But really time does not belong to you. It's not yours, it's not mine. We don't have time. Time belongs to God. He gave you and He gave me to manage it for Him. Yet this is the biggest problem that we have as human beings. When we are supposed to give back time to God, we do it grudgingly. We think we are doing God a favor by giving Him a service, by giving Him His time. Time belongs to Him. It's not your time. Somebody that is upright is not going to be grudgingly give back time to God. They are going to willingly give time to God, knowing that you are, God borrowed you. So you have a loan that you are repaying. You are repaying the loan. If we can have these attributes ourselves, I'm repeating that we are not going to be capable to be slacking in our service to God, but we will give Him the best. We will prioritize Him before our anything that is around us. It could be our family. I will not prioritize my family, I will prioritize God. I will not prioritize my children, I will prioritize God. I will not prioritize my career, I will prioritize God. I will not prioritize my profession, I will prioritize God. Think about anything that we prioritize. That will play second fiddle to God if I have the attributes that Job had. Listen to the statement. I want you to take this statement back home. The statement that we are told about Job twice, in chapter 1 and chapter 2. In all this, Job did not sin against God. Why not? Because of the four attributes that he had. I want to conclude by giving you this quotation. And I hope this quotation is actually going to help us moving forward. And the quotation says, Christianity, if it is false, it is of no importance to you and to me. So we have no business to be here. If Christianity is false, we should rather be spending this time doing some other things somewhere. So if Christianity is false, it is of no importance to you or to me. Then the writer goes on and says, but if it is true, then it is of infinite importance. So what does that mean? The opposite is true. If it's false, we don't need to come here. We don't need to spend time here. We don't need to waste time. Let's go and be engaged with something else. But if you and me believe that Christianity is true, then Christianity is of infinite importance. And something that is of infinite importance needs to be treated with kid love, because it can slip away. But this writer then ended by saying, the only thing that Christianity is not, and it can never be, is to be moderately important. Christianity cannot be moderately important. Let me repeat this quotation. This time I'm not going to be commenting. Let me just read it out. Christianity, comma, if false, comma, is of no importance, then another comma. And if true, another comma, it is of, let me take that again. Christianity, if false, is of no importance. But if it's true, it is of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is to be moderately important. What did I get from this quotation? And this is the message that I'm getting. If Christianity is important to you, Christianity should be important to my child. If Christianity is important to you, Christianity should also be important to anybody who is dear to me. If Christianity is important to me, all people around me should feel that Christianity is important. Do I doubt that Christianity is important? I mean, let's take this example of Job. Job is not there with his children when they are doing their shenanigans. Whatever they are doing when they are celebrating their birthdays. Job is not there. It's not his business. But after they tell him the message that we are done, Job is going to go down on his knees and he's going to pray to God. And he's going to offer some sacrifices on their behalf. Why? Ask yourself this question. How many times have you spiritually sacrificed for your family or for your children? I've alluded to the fact that we are very good ourselves, all of us, at some point or another we've done it. We are so good to invest in our children's education away from us, where we don't even know what they are doing. That's okay. But if that's all I can do, and I'm not minding about their spiritual side of things, I am thinking that Christianity is moderately important. Because if I thought that Christianity is of infinite importance, the reason why I want to continue worshiping God should be the same reason that should drive me to cause my child to continue worshiping God. I am not saying, don't quote me right, don't quote me wrong. I am not saying we can force our children to worship God if they don't want. No, we can't. But one thing that I have taught myself is that when I die, I don't want to be accountable for my children. I don't want God to say, what they did was because of you. I'll play my part. Let them choose whatever they choose, but I would have tried to show them the right direction. Let's all try to do the same as parents. You show them the right direction. I'm not saying if you show them, they are always going to take it. Some are going to be rebellious. That's normal. We have children that were rebellious in the Bible. You can't do anything out of it. Are you playing your part? That's my question. Have you played your part? Or your part, you have actually played it in separating them from God. As we are supplying them with all the resources they need in their endeavors in life, let's be careful that we are actually not going to be found to be the ones who are actually the architects of taking them away from God. Job would not have done that because Job cared for his children. Even though he lost them and he lost everything, he actually did not sin against God. I wouldn't want to sin against God. Neither would I want you to sin against God. Let's try by all means to have these attributes that we are going to go through again. The attributes that Job had. Number 1, he was blameless. Number 2, he was upright. Number 3, he feared God. And the last one, number 4, he turned away from evil. You and me can actually do exactly the same. Be like Job. Let us not take the Job's story as some story from afar. Leave the story of Job, because it teaches us on where to go and what to do and what not to do. I hope and trust that these few words may actually help us change and think where we are supposed to be tinkering within our lives. There are so many corners in our lives that we perhaps need to change. We don't have time. We need to change them now. Let's start changing them so that we are actually going to be fine-tuning our life as we try. Some of us, of course, we have, lived over half, definitely over half of our lives. We really don't need many things to be looking forward to. In fact, this should be the time that we should be looking forward to God. Maybe them who are still young, they still think they still have time behind them. And let's help them so that they are also going to be starting to shape themselves towards God, so that they can also have these attributes that Job had. Every man, every woman who is living would need these attributes, because they will then help us to move away from evil, so that we don't sin against God. Thank you very much for listening. You have listened so attentively. Thank you.